Well, you just saw this incredible film, and when Paul and I met, we were doing the Batman, and it was during that time that you were approached about this movie, right? Can you talk about how, like, am I right? That was what happened, right? You were approached while we were doing the movie by Steven, or how exactly did it begin?
It was after, but we stayed in touch. Okay. You know, so you and I were in touch. We liked working together, I think.
It was pretty good.
And actually, first of all, say thank you guys for being here. I also want to thank Matt for coming and doing this. So I think it was actually around the time that we started talking about the comic book, and you were in the edit room, and I got a text saying Steven wanted to Zoom, and I said, great. And I didn't know what it was about. I was really nervous. And I hadn't felt that way in a while. Because he's, I guess, like an icon, right?
He's Steven Spielberg.
Yeah. I was, within 5 minutes, so disarmed because he came out right away with sort of his emotional, very open, intuitive self, and started telling me about his family story. And so to see
so you hadn't read the script or anything?
I knew nothing about it. And I was trying to guess, right? I Googled unmade Spielberg projects, and what could it be, and what should I shave, and, you know, what do I do? And I made all the wrong choices, by the way, because as soon as he told me, I put in my contacts when I wear glasses every day, and I did a straight razor shave. I was like, I'll try to look. And his dad had a really good 5 o'clock shadow. His dad wore glasses, so every choice I made for the meeting was wrong, except we just had a wonderful conversation, because as soon as he opened the door talking about family, we just, like, talked like, you know, people, and that's an area where I definitely can sort of meet him. It's something that's always meant a lot to me, and I'm not an actor who thinks they should play every part, or even wants to, but once he told me what it was about, I did have a big feeling. I thought, I really hope I cast me for this, you know. And we had a second Zoom where after I got to read the script, which was very beautifully written, him and Tony Kushner, was very moved by it, and I felt like, oh, this is like actually an important step for Steven in his life and in his career, and that was exciting. And then we had a third Zoom, and I thought, and this took a while, and I thought, we had something that first Zoom, and when something takes that long, you know, what does it mean? And the third Zoom was Steven with an unlit cigar in his mouth. And he said, I think you'd make my dad proud. And I was like, oh my God. And so then I probably told you about it when we were catching up sometime, and you told me, and part of the fun of asking you to do this tonight and get to see Fabelmans was that Matt interned with Kathleen Kennedy, right?
Well, the story is weirder than that.
Yeah.
When I grew up in Santa Monica, and here in the 70s, there was a cable channel that was a local cable access. It was Theta Cable. And so there was a program that this guy put together called Air Your Shorts. And it might not be what you're thinking it was. They were airing short films. And I saw a kid's films who was my age. And at the end, he was being interviewed, and I was like, oh, I'm so jealous. I want my films on the show. Now, that kid was J.J. Abrams. Oh. And so I called up the show, and the guy was like, yeah. You can have your show, your thing on too, and you can meet this kid. I said, well, I don't care if I meet the kid. I just want my films on the show. And so he put my films on the show, and he said, I think you want to meet this kid. He's your age. You'll like him. So I met J.J., and we became great friends. And then that guy ended up having a festival at the New Art Theater. And he showed, because it turned out that the only people who responded were young kids who made 8mm movies. So they showed our movies, and back in those days, the calendar section of the LA Times was like a very entertainment-based thing, and they had written up, the article has a picture of me and JJ and my friend Mark Sanderson, all with a little movie camera, and it says Beardless Wonders. And Spielberg was like, oh, I made 8mm films when I was a kid. I want to see these. And the guy who was the host of the thing, he had wanted me to sign something that I didn't want to sign. So I was like, I don't know if I'm going to sign this because I feel like he wants to own our movies, and we're like 13. Like, what are we doing? And then all of a sudden, JJ goes, do you know that Steven Spielberg, he wants to see our films. And I was like, oh my God. So I called up Kathy Kennedy myself. I said, I'll get you the films. So he watched the films, and then, he really liked the films. But a year later, we got a call, and it was Kathy Kennedy calling again. And I was like, oh, hi. She goes, well, they found a box in Arizona in the house where Steven grew up. And it was a box that said Stevie Spielberg on it. And it was filled with 8mm films. And they had been sitting in that basement for many years, and it's very warm in Arizona. And she said they need to get repaired. And Steven was like, well, get those kids. Get those 2 kids. So JJ and I, he paid us $250, and we went through all of the movies and we respliced them. And one of the movies is Escape to Nowhere. It is like, that was a crazy thing for me seeing the movie. It literally is. The other one was a movie called Firelight, which I'm telling you is Close Encounters. Like, it's incredible. I mean, and it was. And I remember specifically JJ was like, oh my God, it said a Stevie Spielberg film at the beginning, or maybe Steve Spielberg, whatever it was not yet Steven. And JJ was like, we have to cut those frames out. And I was like, I don't know, we can't cut those frames out. Those frames are like, it's not broken. These are perfect sprocket holes. And to this day, he's really mad at me. But anyway, yes. So that was how I met them. So
that's a mic drop story. You should maybe just call it there. No, I'm kidding. That's an incredible story. So Matt tells me this after I just couldn't believe that nice little. I mean, it's so incredible. And it's so sweet, I think,
Well, so let's talk about the process of this, right? Like the responsibility. Steven Spielberg comes to you. Does he say, "This is my father"? That's who that is, even though it's Bert. It's really Arnold. And then as you're getting, talk about that process of getting, first of all, the feeling of responsibility that you must have had in something that he was deciding to look back at in his life, and then the experience of what did he want you to do? Like, what did he share with you? What did he not share with you? What was the process like for you?
Yeah, so Arnold, the last scene of Bert's in the film that you just saw, we filmed on the 1-year anniversary of Arnold's passing, August 25th. So when Arnold, it might have been 8 months after his passing that I received the script to read. So that's pretty recent. And Leah had only passed. And by the way, at the end of the credits, the last thing you see is for Leah and for Arnold. We were up here, but she passed, I think, a few years before. I can't remember the exact number. It felt very clear in Steven's face what was at stake for him, in a good way. And I think that when your quote leader is that kind of open and vulnerable, even the crew seeing it brings a real energy. And it makes the stakes feel high in a good way. So not only was it a Steven film, but it felt like he's putting himself out there. So we began by Zooming and just talking. It was during the pandemic. It was just before we were all getting vaccinated. And so we were Zooming at first. And it was clear that, and Steven had the right instinct, Burr is Bert, and mimicry and imitation is not part of the game. But I will say every week that we got closer, I could feel more of Arnold and Steven, and more emotion and more memory, like things just coming.
Would he share those with you,
Yeah, we talked together, but I also had access to his family archives. So photographs, recordings, home videos, not just old 8mm footage, and then his sisters would come and visit, would come to set, and say, Dad, I was like, I couldn't. It was that they would call me Dad at some point in the shoot was just so moving. And so I would say it was a really intimate experience in regards to getting to know Steven and getting to know his family, and then trying to take care of Arnold's spirit, but also, frankly, be true to what Bert was for this story, because it is largely true, but it had to be organized somewhat, meaning something that may have happened at 12 actually was 14 in the film, or like whatever. Do you know what I mean? Because It just has to have some, and the ultimate thing at the end of the day is to be there for the moment and try to give the audience something truthful that can make contact with them or that they can make contact with. Hence, even though the closer we got to it, the more Arnold I wanted to bring or carry with me or embody, whatever. At the same time, it's like, okay, well, how do you just release all these months of preparation now into an honest moment so that it has the best chance of making contact with the scene partner and the camera and thus the audience. Yeah.
And I heard that I don't know if I saw somewhere that there was like some kind of radio kit that you built or something to get into the mindset because he was such a...
Yeah, so Arnold was also, he was a proper computer genius, and he was also a World War II veteran. So there was actually like a bunch of intel on him, including voice recordings of things that weren't to do with Steven Spielberg, but were like, you served in World War II, can we do an oral history? And they got me the recording. So I could listen to Arnold talk about all this stuff. So one of the, probably my favorite recording of his, the first thing he says, the woman asks, how do you get into electronics? And he says, well, electronics was a way of life for me. And I was like, okay. And he said, when I was a kid, I built a crystal radio, and then went through and I said, okay, well, I guess, Paul, you should probably just start there, So I found this person in Texas who makes these old school crystal radio kits that are of the time period and had a couple sent to me, and I am no engineer. And so for like an 8 to 12-year-old can do this, and it took me probably longer than I would want to admit, but I did get there. But it was so interesting to hear his sense of vocation even at a young age, because Steven obviously had that in a different field. But Arnold, or Bert, I think was somebody who had a beacon inside of him, his brain towards a way of thinking. And the other thing I liked about looking into the engineering aspect, I got a bunch of period manuals from those companies, because at that time, post-World War II, what you wanted, especially if you came from an immigrant family and you were pursuing the American dream, stability, and being a company man was like the top thing then. So if you got to go work for GE or IBM, people weren't entrepreneurs yet. So like the next generations made their own companies, but they did that. Arnold helped build and engineer, designed the first computer that went to Dartmouth College, which they built the first programming language called BASIC on, which then Bill Gates built his first program on BASIC. So like there is an actual clear lineage of like his impact in some way, but it's just of a time where it's actually like you wanted it not to be you. It's like I'm IBM, or GE. And so I read all these period manuals that were about, and I've always loved the 50s. I think my parents are older and I was close with my grandparents. There's something about that post-World War II American man, this idea of integrity and decency, and I always felt like he was somebody who felt deeply but maybe just didn't know how to show it, / I think he kept it to himself for the sake of his family in moments too. And so how to sort of take the very rational brain but still have it be alive emotionally. And I will say for me, Paul, it was nice to step into. I would say I'm a little more up here where he felt, I think an engineer looks at the building and trusts everything, the ceiling's gonna stay there. I'm like, is this airplane gonna stay in the air? Where he's like, yes, it will, right? Because of X, Y, Z. So it was always, okay, I can walk into a room, I can fix this, I understand, and let me see if I can't. And then what happens when you meet a problem you can't fix? And that problem is your marriage or something like that. And I think he didn't know what to do. And it was always a line to walk of how much does he know, how much is unconscious, how much do you choose to turn away from?
What's your sense of that? Like obviously there was an intuition, you think, like how would you describe the way you felt into that? What felt right to you about it?
Well, that changed. And this film, it's got memory and autobiography, but the process of making it felt very alive. Because Steven, well, first of all, Tony Kushner, he rewrites. He still rewrites Angels
So he
in
was
America.
on- he's on the set.
Tony was
So
there.
Tony's
every
on the
day.
set with Steven,
Yeah,
and then
and they
if you're
have
like doing a scene.
ideas, and yeah.
Wow,
So
okay.
the process felt very alive, but even in that way where there was and this is like, I haven't talked about this much. I think it's really interesting. It's kind of a revealing moment. We shot early in the film the camping sequence, and the first day the feeling was Bert can't see anything. The second day of filming the 3-day sequence, the feeling was from Steven like, we have to snap it at Benny. Is it Benny or Bernie? I get the real life and
Benny.
Benny, fictional one. I forget. And I was like, huh, okay. And then the third day, we kind of found the equilibrium of the story. But what I took from that was, when I was a kid, you couldn't see anything. Now that I'm watching this as an adult, you can see something, and it must be upsetting.
Yeah.
And then the third day, like this back to like the storytelling director, where it's like, okay, but it was very interesting to see Steven's relationship with the material and my relationship. And
What
all
was
the
that like?
actors.
I mean, it's so interesting because, you know, somebody who's been sort of in awe of him for like, Steven Spielberg is like, I mean, Steven Spielberg, but he has the ability to tell a story with a shot in a movie that really no one does. Like he's sort of, and it clearly is innate. I mean, there's something going on where he knows where to put the camera and how to move, you know, the choreography and how it goes from moment to moment and then end with the camera in a different spot or on a different frame that has taken you through a whole journey, and you're like, how did you do that? Like crazy things. And from what I've heard, this is the kind of thing that comes to him instinctually, just happens on the set. And so what was how did it work? I mean, I'm so interested to know that Tony was there and that you guys would rewrite the scenes, and then how did that work with him, like setting up shots? What was the rehearsal like?
Yeah, I mean, and we wouldn't necessarily heavily rewrite things, but there was always a ball. If a ball wanted to go in the air, it could. You know, and we could pass something around the room. So in general, Steven was like, we're going to talk a lot in advance, and then when we're there, like I like to work fast, and he is like highly intuitive, and I think this is the film. He's letting you into the way he sees the world, which is through the camera. It is how he sees the world. So there were certain scenes that were planned, but there was probably more scenes where he might watch the blocking and then go, here's what we're doing. And
So you'd rehearse it, he'd watch it, and then come
not
up
even
with the...
full out, but something like, oh, this is what the blocking will be, and let me see, let's walk through it. It wouldn't be a rehearsal where it was about the acting or the notes. It was kind of a just let me see it in the space with the actors and the right faces there and blah, blah, blah. And then he would say, okay, this is what we're doing. And sometimes it would be a oneer, and sometimes it wouldn't be, but it was clear that he trusted his gut and had this intuitive film machine inside of him. And that was kind of beautiful, I think, as somebody who, you know, is trying to trust their own instincts, right? Which is scary to do, actually. And to see him basically go, well, this has to be the way it's shot because it's what I see in my head. Essentially, is what I'm taking from that. It's like somebody else would do it different, but like this
That was
is
the
what
way
I
you
see,
saw it, yeah.
and this must be. But moments like right at the end of the film, for some reason, I was very moved by when the kid comes out of the John Ford office, and it goes to his hands on the railing, and then up.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
And
but I
it's a
was
total
moved
Steven
by
Spielberg
that.
thing, too. I
I was
know.
like, what the fuck? Why did you go to the hands? And the energy of the body. But I was like, I never would have. Why the hands
No way.
on the bars? You know, like,
Yeah.
and I was moved by that little moment. You know, I was like, damn. So, yeah, I think he's following some intuitive, you know, film machine that's inside of him. And I think you see through that kid the way that, whether it's the pulsing on the grandma's neck, I think everything was, and this is him, I'm glad he wrote his story in the pen with which he knows best, rather than, you know, writing a book. I think that this is the way for him to express who he is.
It's the way he sees the world, right? Yeah. And so what about in terms of, so you've worked with Michelle before,
Mhm.
so the idea of is when you work with someone who you've worked with, who you know, and you're approaching something like this, is that like a helpful thing? Like, okay, so let's try and figure this out together. Like, how did, with Stephen, I'm curious about rehearsals, maybe they were before. It sounds like on the set there wasn't a lot of rehearsal. How did you all become a family? What was that process like?
Yeah. So I've known Michelle for a long time, actually, and she's a wondrous actress, and I think she's a wonderful mother, and I've always admired her. And it's funny because we both knew we were cast, and we both, I think, consciously or unconsciously decided not to text each other. And I think we trusted that we were going to show up there for Bert and for Mitzi, and I think we had enough trust between each other. And I kept thinking, we should text Michelle, and it doesn't feel right. I don't know why. I don't know why I'm not texting her, but it doesn't feel like I need to or should. It was the opposite with Gabriel, where we started talking on the phone, and then we got together in LA in person, and he's a very self-possessed, confident young man. He really wasn't afraid to ask questions and wanted to talk about acting and all that stuff. And that was really helpful because, when I first met Gabriel, it sometimes takes me a while to get to the place where I believe myself. So I wouldn't say I'm somebody who just likes to jump in and, so with Gabriel, I met him in I think he has more facial hair than I do. So I was like, well, how is this going to work? How am I going to believe myself? So we needed to spend time together. And I needed to be able to drive him around LA because he didn't have a license, he's Canadian, and I guess Canadians have a license, so that doesn't explain that part. But I needed to somehow cultivate something with him where I could look over. And whether or not he knew he was doing it, just the fact that he was looking to me for almost advice, not on how to do a scene, but like, for example, the kid who played the bully is from Australia in this film. And he was like, he's in my hotel and he wants to hang out. And I think, of course I want to hang out, but like, I don't know if that's the right thing to do for the characters because we have to like, and what's okay here, or can I keep my, and I talked to him about the different parts of that. And I said, this is a very personal story, whatever, But by having it created a bond where it's easier for me to look over and think, oh, Gabriel, Sammy, like, I know your face now, I know what makes you a little happier, a little like, and just be able to actually like start to think like my boy,
Right. And you're a father now, right?
Yeah.
Very recently again, a second time.
Yes.
And
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So actually, and that's just thinking about the Batman and then this.
You're so similar, it's crazy.
I know. It's like, I don't want to.
Did you feel, that's one thing I would say, did you feel like, God, I don't know if I can do this film because I just did the Batman?
No, I felt the opposite. I felt so lucky. It felt like, well, first of all, one of the things that Stephen really referenced when talking to me was Escape of Dano Mora, and then I read the script and his father's. How did he get from there to here? And I was kind of touched by that, so I was like, okay, great, but that is so lucky for me as an actor and as an artist and as a person that I get the chance to play somebody like Bert after Edward Ashton. And I think the important thing for me there on a Paul human level where your life and your art sometimes intersect is it is a moment in my life where I'm actively every day stepping more and more into my adult self because I've become a parent. And so it felt like a transitional moment for me. I'm not really, when we're doing the Batman, I'm not really bringing my marriage or my kid to the picnic. And but on this night, I was asked to in some way, shape, or form, even though it's about Bert and the given circumstances of this and Mitzi and blah, 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 the part of you you're asking to turn the soil over, inside of yourself is my love for, and what would it mean, so that was actually like, it felt scary to me for that reason. I was like, oh, this is a new fuel, and I actually don't know what it feels like as much. And so that was really kind of rewarding, and I don't know what the next step of that is, but I'm curious, like, okay, yeah.
So, and I'm curious too, because you're such an accomplished filmmaker as well. You're a writer, a filmmaker. Does working with Steven, like, how does that affect, you must be thinking about, I know we sort of talked about this a little bit, and I know you're in the moment where I'm asking the question you don't want to answer, because you're like, wait, I don't want to think about what I have to do next, but does being around someone like that, who's like an old master, does that affect, would you find yourself on the set not only being the character, but in certain moments stepping out and thinking of yourself as a director, like looking at what he was doing and trying to absorb that, or like, because I always think about like, just he's such a, when I made Let Me In, I asked him if I could talk to him about directing kids, and he said for sure, and I came to his office and he told me, one of the things he told me, which was, I hadn't really done anything with kids, and he said, you know what? He said, you're trying to remember what it was like, because that movie for me was really much about being 13, and he said, you're trying to remember what it's like to be 13, but they are 13, so when you're in the scene, just ask them, like, where would you be right now? What would you do in your room? This is your room, what would you do? And just follow them. And it was so exactly right. I followed them everywhere. So I always thought, God, wouldn't it be neat to be on the set with Steven Spielberg and see what his idea of doing a scene is? And so you, as a filmmaker, would you say that, obviously some of it you may not know, I'm sure it's unconscious, but would you say that he affected you in a way that got you excited about the idea of being behind the camera again? Because for me, like I was saying to you before, because I grew up with those 8mm cameras, when he's handling the camera, when he's got the editing equipment, it literally, I have a visceral reaction when he had the camera. I was like, oh, I want that camera. And it was just that idea, I think because I had a similar thing where film for me was a way to kind of find some stability or look to make control or meaning out of it, because my parents had a very chaotic marriage, and I know, for the different ways that you got into what you're doing, the process of being close to that, what was that like for you?
Well, I find the end of this film very inspiring, and so there is something in the endeavor as a whole that is inspiring as an actor or writer or filmmaker or anything. But I will say that no, on set, I actually thought that it was sort of a heavy cloak to bear playing Bert in some ways. One, because he's holding a lot of what he's feeling. Two, because of, I think, there's a part of me, Paul, that probably wanted to dork out about something film-wise. Or if I saw Steven feeling a certain way, would Paul want to go give him a hug or make a joke or whatever? But for me, I think once you're there and stepping into this space of the set, I think that I usually try to let what, in this case, Bert needs be my guide. And there was an energy there that I was actually a little scared of almost, because it was Steven, and I wanted him to know that I was happy, or that I was, but I felt like Bert had to be in the room. So it was not that, and I'm sure that it was unconsciously, and again, just the thing we mentioned before of the intuitive spirit, and just saying, okay, if this Paul is what I see in my head, so to speak, that's the voice to listen to. So to just see him follow that with such clarity and freedom, that was inspiring, and the crew and all that, and just a wonderful group of people. But
and you said it was when we spoke, you said there were some moments where it was very emotional for him, of course, to make the movie.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's talked about it, so I'm always a little self-conscious talking about like other people in there. But he's talked about. I mean, yeah, like I think he was 74 times to see Steven sobbing behind his mask. Man, that was both beautiful, and we had some big days. Like, oh, here's a great moment. So that when we tell the kids that we're getting a divorce, the scene is written, it's beautifully written. We're doing the scene all day, big scene. And at some point in the day, Steven said, I want to try something. And he said, okay, everybody, I think we should clear out. He said, Gabriel, Janusz, is coming to the camera. Gabriel, will you walk through the mirror with the camera? He said, I don't know if this is going to work, but let's try, see. And Gabriel walked through with the camera. He's sitting on the stairs right over here watching. And I thought, okay, I did, that's. And when I saw that moment in the film, I was so moved by it that at the end of this scene, where his parents told him they're getting divorced, that's the thing he saw in the room. And I thought, well, that's fucking cool. Like that moment worked out, wow. And so to see it, for me, a lot of the learning, it's really disappointing to watch yourself as an actor, generally. But I always have to see the thing, because we study this material so deeply, and everybody worked so hard on it. So to see the choices that were made from knowing a script that intimately, that is one of the levels of learning that I really enjoy. So to see the way that Steven ended up realizing something in the camera and the cut, and what the sound mix added, and the score, and why things got cut, and what that does to the then I have another plane of access to, because I knew that base material so deeply. Okay, and that gets me through watching the movie.
Right. So the whole process, like where it started to where it ended up.
Yeah. And
trying not to look at yourself. You said the same thing to me when every time we ever talked about anything that you're looking at, it's very hard for you to look at yourself. But that makes the process. You can put that part aside enough to say, okay, that experience here was like, oh, so that's what this was about. That's what this journey was. Is that?
Yeah, and I think it does bring me some closure, because again, it does take a village, and we put a lot into it, and I do, even though it pains me, I do need to see it, but I do take some learning from seeing those elements, especially when it's people like, Michael Kahn has cut how many, and Sarah, how many Steven films, John Williams, I have to take something from seeing the culmination of their work from just the blueprint of the script, and how all those things meet. Yeah.
One last thing, just because for me, the whole thing of being a kid and holding the camera, there's a lot of stuff in the movie where 8mm stuff and 16mm stuff is shot. Did Gabriel do that? Did Steven do that? Or what was that?
Both. Gabriel had a camera, Steven definitely got in there, and you saw the original Escape to Nowhere.
I did, yes.
Steven definitely couldn't help. I think he tried to make it feel, a certain way, but I think he couldn't help going, no, it's
it was
now,
like this.
Yeah, now I can't do that. It has to be frank. I don't know if he could quite bring himself to go all the way back.
That's so funny. Can I say, that was the thing, when I saw the movie, when JJ and I saw the movie, the thing that was they were really good. But they're 8mm movies, and for anyone who's seen an 8mm movie, they're pretty bad. And for me, it was the most exciting thing for JJ and I, because we were huge Steven Spielberg fans, and it was so liberating to look at it and go like, they're really cool, but like they're not that much better than ours. And it was like that kind of thing, like we can do this. And it was that point of view of being a kid and saying, I got a camera and I'm going to tell a story. And then obviously, he went on to be Steven Spielberg. But
Yeah, no, look, his kid is with him. Have you guys all seen the James Lipton moment with Steven on inside the Actors Studio, that Close Encounters? Yeah. Okay, it's, you got to see this moment.
Wait, what happens?
It's incredible. It's just, even Steven referred to his mom as Peter Pan, right? And there's like everything. The stuff in here of the light coming out of the closet, Poltergeist, the tornado. There's movies he didn't even direct.
That's crazy.
The seeds are in his childhood. This is his.
Well, I will say that one thing about it is insane. The stuff from Firelight, there's a little red light that goes through, and there's all this stuff. It is right out of Close Encounters. Like he was making that movie when he was 16. It's amazing. Yeah.
So the James Lipton thing, Matt, which you should
check this out.
Is at the end of that movie, the aliens communicate using technology with music, and his mom was this musician, and his father was this computer genius, and how do they communicate?
That's amazing.
So I don't think Steven even knew that. the moments is very good.
Well, they're waving to us. But it was so great to talk to you, my friend, about
Yeah.
this beautiful movie.